Okay. He's quiet. I guess we can go. Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and I'm proud to be joined by my colleagues, Senators Udall, Shaheen, and Coons, who you'll hear from shortly. Now, today, the House is voting on a resolution that gets to the very nature of our democracy. The vote on the resolution to terminate the President's national emergency declaration should be an easy vote for every member of Congress, Democrat or Republican, if you believe in our Constitution. The Founding Fathers set up an exquisite system of checks and balances, and they were worried about an overreaching executive, and they gave Congress the power of the purse. That power was exercised in the last few weeks, and the Congress said, we will not approve a wall. Now the President is trying to invoke an emergency. But there is no emergency, even by his own words. He said, I don't have to do it, but I want to do it. That's not an emergency. That is not an emergency by any stretch of the imagination. And just now that the President has invented an emergency out of thin air, the facts on the grounds haven't changed in any way. And all he wants to do is an end run around Congress. We know what he's doing. The question is, will our Republican colleagues participate in that? And just imagine what this might portend for our democracy if it's allowed to stand. What would stop any future president, if they failed in Congress, from declaring a national emergency and doing just what they wanted? It would be a large step away from democracy and towards autocracy. We do not want a president, no American, to be able to just do things by decree and get around Congress. In short, the President, unfortunately, is defacing the Constitution for his own personal gain. And members of both parties are alarmed about this. I've talked to many of my Republican colleagues. I can understand why Leader McConnell said he had a robust debate at his lunch. They're worried about this, genuinely worried. They're going to be pressured, but they are worried. And members of both parties should be incredibly alarmed about this gross subversion of presidential power. When you think about the best way to secure our president's border, this is not the way for a president or any president to exercise his authority. So I call on our Republican friends in the Congress to join us. This should be a moment of bipartisanship. This is a historic moment that historians will look back on as our democracy moves forward in a very difficult 21st century. I'd say to our Republican friends, if you believe our country's founders gave the Congress the power of the president, I'd say to our Republican friends, if you believe our country's founders gave the Congress the power of the purse, not the president, if you believe the Constitution needs to be respected at all times, not just when one party or the other is in the White House, and if you believe the Congress is a co-equal branch of government, vote for the resolution. On one other matter, before I turn it to my colleagues, it's being reported the Trump administration plans to create a committee of cherry-picked pseudoscientists under the NSC to counter the scientific consensus on climate change. This is maybe the most conspicuous symptom of the disease of climate denial that has infected the Republican Party and the hard right. So today, I announced that Senate Democrats are drafting legislation right now that would defund this fake climate panel. Senator Udall.
Thank you, Leader Schumer. And I asked Leader Schumer to come today because I wanted to talk about the reality on the border, the real reality on the border, and the difference as to what we're seeing here in Washington. The first point to make is there is no emergency. The reality on the ground is that apprehensions from a decade ago are down 60%. So we've seen dramatic drop in apprehensions. Secondly, the overwhelming majority of the drugs that are coming into the United States are coming through ports of entry. They're not crossing out around the ports of entry and getting through the border that way. Number three, the lowest number of undocumented immigrants are in the United States today than there ever have been. And fourth, when President Trump went down to El Paso, the mayor of El Paso spoke up proudly about what a safe city El Paso was. And it is right on the border with the big Mexican city of Juarez across the border. So I couldn't agree more with Leader Schumer. The idea that this president couldn't get from a Republican Congress, what he wanted on this medieval wall from border to border all the way 1,200 miles, couldn't get. Now he declares an emergency when there's no emergency. This is an in-run around the Constitution. This is a president who is grasping for power, and he has to be reined in. And I would call on our Republican friends to stand up for the Constitution, to stand up for our congressional prerogatives. I'm on the Appropriations Committee. It's the Appropriations Committee that has the power of the purse. And the president should not be reaching out after we have acted and taking money that was allocated to the military to put it into this ineffective, wasteful border wall. And then finally, I just want to say, because I'm working with my Republican friends, I have talked to a number of Republicans. They are very concerned, and my sense is that we're very early on here, we're going to get a couple who will step forward on a resolution to terminate this emergency. Thank you.
Senator Udall is author of the resolution that we are putting on the floor. Senator Shaheen.
Good afternoon, everyone. I came from a hearing this morning in the Armed Services Committee. We heard from the commanders of STRATCOM and NORTHCOM. They talked about the threats that are facing this country. They talked about the threats from Russia, from China. They didn't talk about any military threats from our southern border. They did talk about what we need to do to respond to these threats. They talked about the submarines from Russia that are a threat to the United States. And they talked about the importance of the National Guard in their missions to support what NORTHCOM is doing. What we know that the President is talking about for his emergency declaration is to take funding that has already been appropriated from Congress to support our National Guard, to support our military construction projects, and he's talking about taking money from those projects that are critical to ensuring the security of the United States and diverting them to a border wall that is not a problem in terms of the military threat to the United States. As Senator Udall said, the Constitution gives the power of the purse to Congress. Congress has spoken in terms of how we should spend our military construction money for the year and how we should support our National Guard and what we want to do at the border in terms of technology and funding for our ports of entry so that we can help interdict drugs. We cannot let the President divert and undermine what the Constitution says is the power of Congress. I certainly hope our Republican colleagues in the Senate will stand with us against this emergency declaration.
Thank you, Senator Shaheen. Senator Coons.
Senator Shaheen, Senator Udall, and I are all appropriators. That means we serve on the committee, as does the Majority Leader, that makes decisions about how to spend the discretionary budget of the people of the United States. It was not by accident that the founders gave the power of the purse to Congress. In fact, if you go back to Federalist 51, James Madison, one of the framers and later president, wrote that it was essential to our form of government, to the balance and the design of our government under the Constitution, that there be a separation of powers such that each branch could balance and weigh the others. Central to the structure of our Constitution is that the Article I and Article II powers have different roles. It is our role to determine how we would spend the money of the people of the United States. As Senator Shaheen just said, billions of dollars already appropriated, already decided through the appropriate congressional process to be dedicated to military purposes or to disaster relief would, if the President is allowed to proceed unchecked, be diverted to purposes other than those adopted by Congress in the appropriations process. As we heard from Senator Udall, there is no emergency of the level and severity and intensity that justifies this action by the President. Just yesterday, I submitted for the record a letter from 53 former national security leaders of both Republican and Democratic administrations laying out the case why this is not an emergency. And in the more than 4 decades that the National Emergencies Act has been on the books, it has never happened that Congress has passed a resolution of disapproval of a presidentially declared emergency. I think the House is likely to do that today. I think the Senate is likely to take it up. It is my hope that on a bipartisan basis, my colleagues, Republican and Democrat, who understand the structure and history of our Constitution, will vote to disapprove this emergency as something that is unwarranted, unjustified, and not in keeping with the structure and spirit of our Constitution. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Coons. Yes.
Senator McConnell said that Democrats, if it's such a good idea, they shouldn't be afraid to vote yes for it. They should vote present. What do you say to
Well, what I say to Senator McConnell, make no mistake about it, it's just a diversion and a sham. The main issue before us is right now the emergency power. He didn't mention it in his opening speech because there's such division in his caucus about it. And we are asking Leader McConnell and the Republicans, what are you going to do about climate change? We're asking them 3 explicit questions. First, do they believe climate change is real? Second, do they believe it's caused by humans? Third, do they believe Congress should act? Until they, in the majority, put a plan on the floor as to what they would do with climate change, they don't have much standing.
Senator Schumer, to that end,
Next.
To that end, there was a vote on Medicare for All in 17. Your side all voted present. We wouldn't anticipate a repeat of that when they put this on the floor on the Green New Deal?
Look, because this resolution is a sham and because we are asking our Republican colleagues to say what they would do. McConnell's been leader 5 years. Not a single bill to deal with climate's been on the floor. The first question is, what are they going to do? Because they are in the majority. We can't do anything on climate unless they get something done. We're not going to participate in shams. Taylor. How many Republicans? Well, 3 things. Number one, I think there are 3 already who have come out for the resolution of disapproval. So we only need 1 more. Second, we've heard a lot of talk among our Republican colleagues that they don't like it at all. We know there'll be pressure put upon them. But third, they understand the Constitution, and they've talked about it for many years when McConnell was there, that there shouldn't be overreaching executive power. This is a greater when Obama was there, they talked about it over and over again. This is a far greater overreach than those things. And so I am very hopeful that we will have a very significant number, enough to pass it, maybe even with a margin, that this resolution that the House will pass will also be approved here in the Senate. Okay? Thank you, everybody.